Welcome to my channel. Today we delve into a chilling tale that began as an ordinary flight across the calm blue skies of Colorado but ended in a tragedy that would haunt aviation forever. It was a clear morning when United Airlines Flight 585 prepared for its short journey. Families were returning home, business travelers buried themselves in their laptops, and the crew smiled as they went through their safety checks. No one aboard could have imagined that within minutes their world would spin into chaos. High above the Rocky Mountains, the Boeing 737 climbed smoothly through the clouds, sunlight pouring into the cabin windows. Passengers chatted softly, unaware that beneath them, something invisible had already begun to fail, something no pilot could predict or control. At first, it was just a flicker, a tremor deep within the rudder system, a tiny movement that didn't belong. The pilots noticed a small yaw to the left, then to the right. They adjusted lightly, trusting their instruments, their training, and the reliability of the aircraft. The control tower received their regular check-ins, calm and steady. Everything sounded normal. On radar, their green blip moved smoothly across the sky. But inside the cockpit, a quiet unease grew. Captain Harold Green felt it first, that instinct pilots describe as a whisper in the gut. He glanced at his co-pilot. The instruments were fine, but the controls felt stiff, unnatural, as though the plane itself was resisting them. Down below, the mountains rolled endlessly, silent witnesses to what was about to unfold. Within seconds, that uneasy calm shattered. A sudden jolt rocked the aircraft, the nose dipped violently, coffee cups flew into the air, and passengers screamed as oxygen masks dropped from above. In the cockpit, alarms erupted, the flight deck filled with flashing red warnings. Captain Green shouted over the noise, pulling the yoke back with all his strength. The plane refused to respond. Every training instinct told them to level the wings, to climb, to fight the dive, but nothing worked. They were falling, plummeting from the clouds at over 450 kilometers per hour. The passengers could see the earth spinning through the windows, mountains rushing closer. Someone prayed, someone else screamed their child's name. In those final seconds, silence filled the cockpit, the kind of silence that comes when every sound fades, replaced only by the rushing wind of a doomed fall. And then, the radar blip vanished. The world above Colorado froze, the control tower's screens blinked. The flight had disappeared without warning. Emergency frequencies were filled with static. Nearby aircraft tried to make contact, but there was nothing. Minutes later, rescue teams scrambled across rough terrain, snow, and forest, searching for any sign of life. When they finally reached the site near Colorado Springs, the wreckage was scattered like confetti across the hills, pieces of metal twisted and burnt, yet the tail section was mostly intact. Investigators arrived within hours, their faces pale, because this was no ordinary crash. The impact was too vertical, too sudden. There was no sign of an explosion or engine failure. The flight data recorder was found half buried in the dirt, its outer shell charred but the memory inside still intact. And so began one of the most mysterious air crash investigations in American aviation history. Days turned into weeks as investigators replayed the final minutes again and again. The pilots had not declared an emergency, no distress call was ever made. The black box revealed the terrifying truth. Within seconds of descent, the rudder had deflected fully to one side, slamming the plane into a deadly spin. But how? No warning, no mechanical error logged. Experts suspected wind shear, turbulence, even sabotage. But nothing fit. Boeing engineers examined the wreckage piece by piece, and deep inside the rudder power control unit they found something chilling. A jam, a reversal that caused the rudder to move in the opposite direction of pilot input. It meant that when the pilots tried to correct the roll, the plane fought against them, sending it spiraling faster toward the ground. A silent assassin hidden within the aircraft's own system, one that no one knew existed. Years later, the same malfunction would bring down another flight, US Air 427, confirming what the families of Flight 585 had suspected all along. The rudder design was flawed, It took years of lawsuits, endless hearings, and sleepless nights for the truth to come out. The investigators who had first walked through that wreckage never forgot the eerie quiet of that crash site, the sound of twisted metal creaking in the wind, the photographs of passengers' last moments, and the haunting knowledge that the pilots had done everything right but were betrayed by the very machine they trusted. Today, every time a 737 climbs into the sky, it carries the legacy of that tragedy, lessons written in loss, safety born from sacrifice, and every passenger who looks out the window, watching the clouds roll by, does so because those investigators refused to give up until they knew the truth. So the next time you hear a plane's engines hum and see its wings glint in the sunlight, remember the story of United Airlines Flight 585, a flight that fell from the sky at 450 kilometers per hour, leaving behind not just wreckage, but answers that changed the future of aviation, a story of human error, mechanical mystery, and courage in the face of the impossible. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as gripping and emotional as I did, consider subscribing to the channel for more real stories that reveal the hidden truths behind the skies we trust. Stay safe, and see you in the next one. The investigation into United Airlines Flight 585 didn't end at the crash site. In fact, it had only just begun. As the sun set over the Colorado mountains that evening, the quiet was broken by the distant sound of helicopters. Floodlights swept across the wreckage, revealing the twisted metal scattered across several hundred meters of terrain. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board arrived, their faces grim. Every crash told a story, and this one was whispering a dark secret buried under steel and smoke. At first glance, the wreckage suggested a near-vertical impact, meaning the aircraft had plunged nose-first, a move almost impossible to recover from at that altitude and speed. But what puzzled them most was the lack of any distress signal. No mayday, no mechanical warning, no radio crackle of panic. It was as if the pilots never had a chance to speak before the sky swallowed them whole. Through the night, recovery teams worked in silence, their breath visible in the freezing air. Every piece of the aircraft was catalogued, photographed, and marked. The cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder, the black boxes, became the top priority. When they were finally found, coated in mud and ash, everyone hoped they would reveal the truth. In the hangar where the parts were laid out, investigators stared at the charred remains of what was once a proud Boeing 737. One man picked up the throttle lever. It was locked in the idle position, meaning the pilots had cut engine power, not to climb or maneuver, but to slow their descent. It was a desperate act, not a mistake. Nearby, the rudder pedals told another story. They were pushed to one side with incredible force, one that didn't make sense for a normal descent. Something was forcing the plane to turn in ways it shouldn't. The black box recordings painted a picture more haunting than anyone expected. The first few minutes were calm, the sound of routine chatter between Captain Green and his co-pilot, the hum of the engines steady, and then, in the last 20 seconds, chaos erupted, the cockpit filled with alarm tones and the sharp pull of control inputs. "Left rudder!" the captain shouted, followed by a short grunt, then silence. After that, the only sound was a deep mechanical groan, like the plane itself was fighting its pilots. The recording ended abruptly with static. Investigators listened to it over and over, trying to make sense of what they had just heard. Nothing matched the usual signs of turbulence or weather interference. There was no explosion, no fire before impact. The cause wasn't outside the plane, it was inside it. Back in Seattle, Boeing engineers were called in to assist. The 737 was one of their most trusted and widely used models, known for its reliability, but now that reputation hung in the balance. In their laboratories, the rudder system was examined under microscopes, every valve, piston, and servo unit tested. Then one technician noticed something strange inside the power control unit, the component responsible for moving the rudder. The unit had jammed at full deflection, meaning when the pilots pushed the pedal to correct the turn, it might have moved the opposite way instead. It was a chilling realization. If true, it meant that every 737 flying the skies could be a ticking time bomb, but when Boeing tested other planes, they couldn't reproduce the failure. The evidence was elusive. The truth was slipping through their fingers like smoke. Meanwhile, families of the victims gathered in grief. Some sat silently in hotel conference rooms, others demanded answers. Photographs of loved ones were taped to bulletin boards, candles lit beneath them. The pain was unbearable. For months, investigators struggled to provide any concrete explanation, and the longer it took, the more the public began to suspect that someone was hiding something. News anchors spoke about mystery over the Rockies, while newspapers asked hard questions. How could a plane fall from the sky without warning, without even a hint of trouble? The pressure grew, and so did the desperation to find an answer, but the NTSB's final report came with a painful conclusion. Probable cause undetermined. The words cut deep. 4 families. It wasn't closure, it was an open wound. But time has a way of repeating lessons that go unlearned, and in 1994, almost 3 years later, U.S. Air Flight 427 plunged to the ground in Pennsylvania under eerily similar circumstances. The aircraft was another Boeing 737, the same sudden roll, the same steep dive, the same horrifying silence from the cockpit. It was as if Flight 585 had come back to haunt them. Investigators revisited every piece of evidence, this time with more data, and the connection became impossible to ignore. Both crashes shared the same signature, a rudder hard-over, caused by the same flawed design in the hydraulic servo valve. The truth was finally within reach, and it was devastating. The rudder system could, under rare temperature and pressure conditions, jam in reverse, turning a pilot's correction into a death spiral. One invisible defect buried deep in the machinery had claimed dozens of lives. When this discovery came to light, the aviation world trembled. Boeing faced intense scrutiny, public confidence shook, and pilots demanded answers. How had such a critical flaw gone unnoticed for so long? The company worked day and night to redesign the rudder system. Regulators grounded planes for inspections, and for the first time, the truth began to heal the wound left by Flight 585. Yet for those who had lost family on that cold Colorado morning, the answers came too late. One mother, holding a framed picture of her son, told a reporter, "He trusted the sky, and it betrayed him." Her words echoed across newsrooms and congressional hearings, turning grief into change. That pain forced the aviation industry to rebuild, not just the hardware, but the trust between the machines and the humans who fly them. Even now, years later, investigators still speak about Flight 585 in hushed tones, calling it the mystery that taught them humility. It reminded everyone that even the most advanced technology is vulnerable to the smallest flaw. A fraction of a second, a single valve, can separate life from tragedy. Every flight after that was safer because of the lessons carved into those mountains. And as the wind still howls over Colorado Springs, it carries the memory of the people who fell from the sky. Not in vain, but as a warning, a whisper that says, check again. For in aviation, certainty is the only thing that keeps man and machine in harmony. The investigation into Flight 585 entered a darker, more obsessive phase. It was no longer just a question of what went wrong, but why it took so long to find out. The NTSB team had been humiliated once before by the undetermined verdict, and when Flight 427 crashed years later, their determination turned into obsession. In a warehouse filled with wreckage, investigators spent months reassembling both aircraft from the twisted fragments, piece by piece, wing to wing, screw to screw, each part labeled with red and yellow tags. The air smelled of oil, burnt insulation, and memories no one wanted to remember. What they were looking for wasn't visible to the naked eye. It was mechanical betrayal buried deep within the heart of the rudder, one that had eluded even the engineers who built it. And as the investigation stretched into years, the human cost behind the paperwork grew unbearable. Families demanded justice while corporations fought to protect their names. In a small windowless room, a young engineer named Susan Reynolds made a discovery that would finally change everything. while testing a hydraulic power control unit in a cold chamber meant to simulate high-altitude pressure, she noticed something impossible. Under certain temperature and pressure combinations, the servo valve inside the rudder actuator reversed, meaning that when pilots pushed left, the rudder went right. It was subtle, only a fraction of an inch of metal movement, but it was enough to doom an entire aircraft. Susan called her supervisor, and soon the room was filled with engineers and investigators watching the test repeat itself over and over. The realization sent chills through everyone present. The very system designed to keep the aircraft stable had turned into its killer. Boeing's representatives tried to argue it was too rare to matter, but the evidence spoke louder. The ghost of Flight 585 had finally revealed its voice. Meanwhile, in Colorado Springs, the memories of that crash had never faded. Residents still remembered the loud, thunderous roar followed by silence. One firefighter who had been first on the scene described it as a crater of sorrow. He recalled finding pieces of luggage, a child's shoe, and a burned boarding pass half buried in the snow. Even years later, he couldn't forget the smell of jet fuel mixed with the cold mountain air. In the homes of the victims' families, photographs stayed. Frozen in time, birthdays that never came, calls that were never made. They followed the news as the investigation evolved, waiting for closure that took far too long. When the new discovery was announced, many cried, not just from grief, but from vindication. Finally, someone had admitted what they had felt in their hearts all along, that their loved ones had not died from pilot error, but from a hidden flaw no one wanted to face. In Washington, D.C., hearings were called. The public demanded accountability. Boeing executives sat under bright lights, their suits crisp, their faces unreadable, while NTSB officials explained the findings. The words, "rudder hard over," became part of aviation vocabulary overnight. Senators grilled the company on why the design flaw wasn't detected earlier, and why, after the first crash, no immediate steps were taken to ground or inspect similar aircraft. Behind the calm professionalism, the tension was electric. Reporters filled the hallways, their notebooks shaking as they wrote, "Corporate negligence or honest mistake." One headline read, "Boeing engineers maintained that the failure was almost statistically impossible, but that excuse fell flat in the face of human loss." By the end of the hearings, regulations were rewritten, new testing protocols introduced, and thousands of rudder units across the world were replaced. An invisible error had forced an entire industry to confront its vulnerability. As investigators pieced together their final report, something remarkable happened. Their frustration turned into respect for the pilots of Flight 585. When the data was reconstructed, it showed how Captain Green had fought until the very last second, pulling every control, cutting the power, doing everything a pilot could possibly do to save his passengers. He had been betrayed not by his skills but by the machine itself. One investigator, in tears, said during a press briefing, "They didn't fail their passengers, the system failed them." Those words echoed across the aviation world. Memorials were held for the crew, and for the first time, they were recognized not as victims but as heroes. The NTSB's final report identified the probable cause as a rudder power control unit malfunction leading to a hard-over condition. It was one of the longest investigations in U.S. aviation history, spanning years, but it ended with truth, something the victims' families had waited far too long to hear. Even after the reports were published, the psychological impact lingered among pilots everywhere. Flight simulators were updated to include rudder failure scenarios, new checklists were introduced, but nothing could erase the image of a plane spiraling uncontrollably toward the ground. Seasoned pilots spoke in hushed tones about their fears. Some admitted privately that they couldn't stop thinking about what they would do if it happened to them. Airlines began offering specialized training. Safety briefings became longer, and cockpit procedures more cautious. The tragedy had changed not just the design of a plane but the mindset of those who flew it. Fear had turned into vigilance, and vigilance became a form of respect for those who never made it home. Decades later, the site of the crash became a quiet memorial, a stone marker surrounded by pine trees and flowers left by strangers. Hikers sometimes stopped there, unaware of the story beneath their feet, but if they listen closely, they can still feel it, the faint echo of a moment when technology, nature, and fate collided in the sky, leaving behind lessons written in sorrow and resilience. Investigators who had since retired often said that Flight 585 taught them one unshakable truth: that perfection in aviation is a myth, but persistence saves lives. Every screw, every test, every new safety standard written in the years after became a silent tribute to those lost souls, their story carved into the heart of every pilot who takes to the air today. As the years pass and planes soar higher and faster, one thing remains constant: the price of safety is written in tragedy. The ghosts of Flight 585, Flight 427, and all the others who followed remind the world that the sky demands respect. Every time a pilot looks out at the clouds, every time a passenger buckles their seatbelt, they are protected by lessons paid for in heartbreak, and though the mountains of Colorado stand silent now, they carry within them the memory of that day, when a plane plunged from the clouds at 450 kilometers per hour and left behind a truth so powerful it reshaped the future of flight. When the official investigation finally concluded, the aviation world seemed to breathe again, but beneath that relief lingered unease, because everyone who had seen the wreckage of Flight 585 knew that the truth came far too late. Boeing's redesigned rudder system was now in production, and airlines worldwide were racing to retrofit their fleets, yet deep inside the hangars and offices where decisions were made, the memories of what happened in Colorado haunted them. One wrong signal, one mechanical twitch, had been enough to erase an entire plane from the sky. Pilots began to whisper about the ghost in the tail, the unseen hand that could turn a peaceful flight into a nosedive within seconds. For many, it wasn't just a technical problem, it was psychological, the sense that trust had been broken between human and machine, between faith and fear. Captain Harold Green's name became a symbol among pilots, a man who fought the impossible battle until the very end. During simulator tests that recreated the flight, professionals from around the world tried to do what he did, to recover control after a rudder reversal at low altitude. None of them succeeded. Every simulation ended in the same chilling spiral, the screen showing terrain rising rapidly until the impact. One instructor later said, "He never had a chance, but he never stopped trying." Those words turned into the core of every safety lecture, reminding new pilots that heroism isn't in survival, but in resistance against impossible odds. In the airline's headquarters, a small memorial plaque with the crew's names was placed in a hallway lined with glass, sunlight reflecting off it each morning, as if the sky itself was paying respect to those who went down fighting. Meanwhile, the families continued to live in the shadow of unanswered questions. Even with the truth known, closure felt distant for them. Every plane that passed overhead was a reminder. Children had grown up without parents, spouses had learned to carry pain quietly. One widow, Linda Green, visited the crash site every year on the anniversary. She would sit by the memorial stone surrounded by pine needles and whisper, "We finally know what happened, but it doesn't make it hurt any less." Her story caught the attention of a journalist who later published a feature titled The Fall of Flight 585. A mystery that taught the world to listen. The article spread across the nation, reigniting public discussion about airline safety, but more importantly, it gave human faces to what had long been reduced to engineering diagrams and accident code. As Boeing worked to restore trust, the company launched a global safety initiative. New systems were designed with triple redundancy, 3 layers of mechanical and digital checks meant to prevent a single point of failure. Flight control units were tested beyond normal limits, exposed to temperatures and pressures far greater than anything in the atmosphere. Engineers called it engineering by ghosts, because every improvement carried the memory of lives lost. Yet the transformation was not only technical, it was moral. For the first time in history, both corporations and regulators began working together, not out of compliance but out of conscience. One FAA official said quietly during a press conference, "Safety is written in blood, but our duty is to make sure no more ink is spilled." The public's fascination with air crash mysteries grew during those years. shows like Mayday and air disasters began chronicling real events with chilling accuracy, and when they covered Flight 585, viewers around the world felt the raw fear of falling from the sky at 450 kilometers per hour, but also the determination that followed. Millions watched as animation recreated the cockpit's final moments, showing how the pilots pulled back, tried to level out, and never gave up. It was heartbreaking, but it also turned tragedy into education, teaching millions about how aviation evolves through failure. The program ended with a simple line: "For every life lost, thousands were saved," and in homes across America, people sat quietly, thinking about the courage it takes to trust the sky. Inside the NTSB archives, the file for United Airlines Flight 585 now rests beside hundreds of others, bound in a black binder, pages filled with data, photos, and transcripts. One page stands out: the final line of the report, which reads, "Probable cause: malfunction of the rudder power control unit resulting in loss of control." So few words to describe so much loss, but to investigators, it was a monument of perseverance. Behind every line of that report were sleepless nights, endless tests, and people who refused to let silence win. Even the junior engineers who started as assistants on the case became veterans, shaping policies and systems that would protect countless passengers in the decades to come. One of them, Susan Reynolds, the same woman who discovered the servo valve defect, later led major safety programs at Boeing, ensuring that the very flaw she found would never return. She once said in an interview, "Flight 585 wasn't just an accident, it was a teacher, a cruel one, but a necessary one." Time moved on, but stories have a way of returning to those who remember. In aviation schools, young cadets still watch the reconstruction of Flight 585, not to fear, but to learn. They study how small failures grow into catastrophes, how communication between pilot and control tower must stay unbroken, and how no one should ever underestimate the power of the unseen. In that sense, the passengers and crew became eternal mentors for every future aviator, their loss transformed into knowledge, their voices still echoing in every safety drill, every pre-flight check, every decision made 30,000 feet above ground. For as long as humanity dares to fly, their legacy will remain the invisible guardian that reminds us, no sky is safe unless we respect its silence. As night falls over Colorado, the crash site rests beneath stars that shimmer cold and quiet. Wind whispers through the pines, brushing over the memorial stone. Somewhere far above, a jet passes by, its lights gliding across the heavens, its passengers asleep, unaware of the sacrifices made to ensure their safety. And maybe that's how it should be, because true safety is invisible. It's born from tragedy, shaped by courage, and protected by memory. United Airlines Flight 585 may have vanished from radar that morning, but its spirit never left the sky. It lives in every flight that lands safely, every family that reunites at the terminal, and every heartbeat that dares to trust the clouds once more. In the years that followed the tragedy of Flight 585, aviation entered a new era, one built on painful lessons written in wreckage and tears. For most people, life returned to normal. Airports buzzed with travelers, children pressed their faces to airplane windows, and the rhythmic hum of engines once again became a sound of comfort rather than fear. But for those who had stood among the twisted metal in the Colorado hills, for those who had heard the silence of the cockpit tapes, flight would never feel the same again. They knew how fragile that trust really was, how quickly calm could turn to chaos, how in one instant, gravity could become a merciless enemy. Yet beneath the fear there was something else, a quiet vow that no one would ever fall from the sky again for the same reason. At Boeing's engineering centers, that vow became an obsession. The company's brightest minds worked around the clock to ensure the rudder malfunction could never happen again. Inside vast hangars, mechanics stripped down entire 737s. Hydraulic systems hissed as they were tested at freezing temperatures and under extreme pressure. Every part of the rudder assembly was redesigned, every valve, every seal, every hinge was reconsidered. The rudder's power control unit, once the hidden killer, was now rebuilt with dual failsafes, two separate hydraulic channels, each ready to override the other in case of jamming. The engineers called it redundancy, but survivors' families called it redemption. It wasn't just about safety anymore, it was about restoring faith in flight, faith that the sky could once again be trusted to carry the living instead of taking them. For the investigators who had spent years untangling the mystery, the work never truly ended. Many of them joined a new branch of the FAA focused on predictive safety, a system meant to detect and fix potential problems before they caused disasters. It was here that they turned tragedy into foresight, building advanced data models that monitored control systems, wind shifts, and pressure differentials in real time. Decades later, that technology would save hundreds of lives by preventing incidents before they began, yet every time they tested a new feature, they remembered the faces of those who never had a chance. One of the lead investigators, now retired, once told a reporter, "Every time a plane lands safely, Flight 585 lands with it." His eyes filled with quiet pride and sorrow, knowing that progress had been bought at the highest possible price. Public confidence in air travel began to return slowly, though fear never completely vanished. People had learned that safety wasn't magic. It was hard work, sacrifice, and truth born from pain. TV networks aired documentaries showing the story of Flight 585 in full. Millions watched as computer reconstructions brought the tragedy back to life, recreating that fatal descent, the screams, the loss, but also the determination that followed. One particular episode of Mayday air disaster struck viewers deeply. It showed the investigators standing among the wreckage, snow falling gently around them, vowing not to close the case until they understood every second of that final dive. Audiences wept, not only for the lives lost, but for the dedication of those who refused to let the story end in mystery. The episode concluded with a haunting but hopeful message: they fell so that others may never fall again. Yet even as safety improved, the legacy of Flight 585 revealed deeper truths about human nature. In boardrooms and control towers alike, people began to ask difficult questions about responsibility, about how many warnings must be ignored before lives are lost. A new culture emerged within aviation, one of transparency and accountability. No longer could mechanical flaws be hidden behind corporate walls. Now, every incident triggered open discussion. Every pilot report was treated like a goldmine of potential prevention, and out of this new honesty grew an unspoken rule: we learn or we repeat. It was harsh, but it saved lives. The aviation world became a brotherhood of shared knowledge, bound together by the memory of those who had perished when the system failed them, and it was that unity, more than any metal or machinery, that made flying safer than ever before. For the families, life moved forward in uneven steps. Some remarried, others found peace in advocacy, creating foundations to support aviation safety research. Linda Green, the captain's widow, became a quiet voice of hope. She never sought fame, but every year, she spoke at a small aviation safety symposium, her words simple yet unforgettable: we can't undo the past, but we can make the sky safer for the next mother, the next child, the next pilot who trusts the wind. Her speeches inspired young engineers and pilots who would later lead the next generation of aircraft design. One of them even named a safety algorithm after her, Project Greenlight, a system that monitors rudder deflection patterns in real time. Her name, like her husband's, had become part of the invisible shield protecting millions of travelers around the world. Years passed, and technology advanced beyond what the world of the 1990s could imagine. Autopilot systems grew smarter, sensors became more precise, and cockpits turned into digital sanctuaries of safety. Yet even with all that progress, the memory of Flight 585 still hovered like a soft echo over the industry. During pilot training, instructors still replayed the crash sequence as a lesson in humility, a reminder that no system, no human, no machine is infallible. The trainees would sit in silence as the screen showed the sudden dive, the struggle, and the final static. One instructor would always say at the end, "This is why we check, why we test, why we never assume." And in that silence, every student would feel the weight of that lesson settle deep within their hearts. At the crash site, time had softened the scars, nature had taken back the land, grass and wildflowers grew over what was once twisted metal, trees whispered in the breeze where debris had once burned, and though few people visited now, those who did often left small tokens. Paper planes folded carefully, letters to loved ones lost, or tiny model aircrafts carrying names written in pen. Pilots who passed over Colorado on clear days sometimes looked down and saluted quietly, a private tribute. Between those who fly and those who never made it home, in that way, Flight 585 had never truly disappeared. It had become part of the earth, part of the wind, part of every journey that starts with the roar of engines and ends with the gentle touch of landing gear. And so, what began as tragedy ended as transformation. United Airlines Flight 585 became more than a case number, more than a file on a shelf. It became a turning point, a line drawn between what aviation once was and what it would become. The crash taught humanity the hardest truth: that perfection is not the absence of failure, but the will to rise from it. The people who died that day gave the world a gift it didn't ask for but desperately needed: the knowledge to prevent another fall, the courage to confront mistakes, and the wisdom to build something stronger. Every takeoff now carries their legacy, every safe landing their unseen blessing, and in the hearts of those who still look to the sky, their story whispers softly, reminding us that even from 450 kilometers per hour of terror, hope can still emerge. The legacy of Flight 585 didn't end with reports, news coverage, or even engineering changes. It became a living, breathing presence within the heart of aviation itself, a silent teacher that would never stop speaking. Decades later, in classrooms where new pilots learned the physics of flight, in labs where engineers designed wings capable of withstanding hurricane-force winds, and in control towers where calm voices guided metal birds through storms, the memory of that fall through the clouds remained a warning that echoed across generations. Never assume, never ignore, never forget. Every safety briefing, every pre-flight inspection, every cautious glance at the weather radar owed a quiet debt to that one morning when the sky took and then gave back something priceless: the will to learn from loss. At United Airlines headquarters, an old photograph still hangs quietly in a hallway where employees walk each morning. It shows the original crew of Flight 585 smiling beside their Boeing 737 before takeoff, their faces young, confident, unaware of what awaited them just hours later. No caption is needed, no memorial plaque beneath it, because everyone in that building knows. The photo doesn't just capture faces. It captures a moment before everything changed. Each employee who passes that frame feels an unspoken responsibility, a reminder that aviation is not just about technology, but about trust, about the lives handed over to steel and sky, trust that must be earned every single day, through vigilance, precision, and heart. Years later, during a safety conference in Washington, D.C., an elderly investigator who had worked the Flight 585 case took the stage. His hair had turned silver, his voice soft, but his words carried weight. "When we first stood among that wreckage," he said, "we thought we were looking for answers, but what we really found was purpose." The room fell silent as he spoke of how the crash changed not just systems, but souls, how engineers began to design with empathy instead of pride, how pilots began to fly with humility instead of confidence, and how airlines began to see passengers not as numbers, but as lives entrusted to their care. His final words were almost a whisper. They fell, and we rose, and the crowd of hundreds stood in quiet applause, some wiping tears from their eyes. In the years that followed, aviation would face new challenges: terrorism, weather disasters, and the growing complexity of automated flight, but none would erase the lessons of that Colorado morning. The redesign of the 737's rudder system became a template for safety innovation worldwide. Engineers from other aircraft manufacturers studied the case, adapting similar fail-safe mechanisms in Airbus and Embraer fleets, a chain of safety born from a single tragedy. Air traffic control protocols were updated to recognize signs of control failure sooner. Communication between pilots and ground became sharper, more immediate, less hesitant, because everyone now knew that seconds could mean the difference between investigation and survival, between memory and miracle. For those who had lost family on Flight 585, the healing was slow. Grief never disappears. It simply learns to live beside you. Linda Green continued to visit schools, universities, and aviation conferences. Her speeches were never bitter, always calm. She would stand before young pilots and say, "My husband's hands were on those controls until the end, and now, your hands carry his work forward." Her grace inspired thousands. In 2015, the FAA dedicated a scholarship in Captain Green's name for aspiring aviators who showed exceptional courage and compassion. Each year, as the recipients received their certificates, they would be told the story of that flight, not to frighten them, but to remind them that flight, like life, demands respect for every decision, every detail, every heartbeat. In Colorado Springs, the memorial site became a place of quiet reflection, surrounded by mountains that had witnessed everything. Local volunteers maintained the path leading up to it. Every year on March 3rd, families, pilots, and even tourists gathered for a small ceremony. Candles flickered in the cold wind, and as the sun set behind the peaks, a moment of silence filled the valley, broken only by the soft sound of jet engines far above. During one of these gatherings, a young pilot placed his wings pin on the memorial stone and said softly, "For them, we fly safer." It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of generations, and those who stood there knew that in that moment, history had come full circle. The tragedy that once broke hearts had now become the foundation of hope. Inside aviation academies, the story of Flight 585 became a mandatory study case, not for its technical details alone, but for its human depth. Students learned how arrogance, delay, and assumption can be just as deadly as mechanical faults. Instructors emphasized that technology may fail, but determination and investigation never should. Simulation rooms replayed the flight's final moments, the desperate struggle of the pilots, the chaos in the cabin, and the ultimate silence, and afterward, the lights would come back on, and the instructor would remind the class, "You are here because they weren't." It was brutal honesty, but it forged respect that no textbook could teach, and each student who walked out of that room carried with them a silent promise to never let complacency write another tragedy in the sky. As technology advanced into the digital age, the echoes of that lesson only grew stronger. Artificial intelligence began monitoring aircraft in real time, capable of detecting micro-anomalies long before a human could. Yet even in this new world of automation, the spirit of Flight 585 remained the compass guiding progress. Engineers often joked that the ghosts of the past were watching their code, ensuring they never forgot the value of a single second. Boeing, once burdened with guilt, had become an industry leader in safety culture, hosting memorial lectures every year to honor those who perished. During one such event, a former flight attendant turned executive said, "They gave us tragedy, and we turned it into truth." Her voice trembled, but her words hung in the air like a benediction, a reminder that aviation is not built on perfection, it's built on persistence. As the sun rises over Colorado today, airliners cut across the horizon, their contrails painting white scars in the blue. Inside each of them, hundreds of lives rest on wings shaped by the sacrifices of those before them. Somewhere, a child gazes out the window in awe, watching clouds drift below, unaware that the smooth hum of engines, the gentle tilt of the rudder, and the calm voice of the captain were all made possible because of lessons born from pain. Above them, the sky remains vast and indifferent, but humanity has learned how to listen to its warnings, how to respect its silence, and how to honor those who never came home by ensuring millions more always do. United Airlines Flight 585 may have fallen from the clouds at 450 kilometers per hour, but its impact reached far beyond that mountain valley. It changed everything, from the way we design, to the way we trust, to the way we remember. Every flight that leaves the ground now carries a trace of that story, written invisibly across the sky, reminding us that safety is not an accident. It's a promise kept through memory, courage, and compassion, For in every landing light that glows against the night, in every steady hand that guides a plane through turbulence, in every family reunited at the terminal, the legacy of Flight 585 still lives, unseen, eternal, and unbroken. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for remembering with me. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you how every journey through the clouds carries stories of sacrifice and survival, then take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Together, we'll continue telling the tales that remind humanity that even when we fall, we rise again, and that in every tragedy, there lies the courage to fly once more.